A young singer stood alone on a dark stage. The theater lights were off. Only a single spotlight hung above him. His hands trembled slightly as he held the microphone. The metal felt cold. Too cold. He cleared his throat. The sound echoed through the empty darkness. But in his mind, the theater was full. Hundreds of faces, rows and rows of people, watching, waiting, judging. He imagined their expressions, the raised eyebrows, the quiet whispers, the laughter that might follow if he made a mistake. And suddenly, the microphone felt heavier. His heart started beating faster. Not because the stage was big, but because of one terrifying thought. What if I look stupid? Maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you've felt it before. You wanted to try something new. Learn English. Start a YouTube channel. Go to the gym for the first time. Speak up in a meeting, sing, dance, create something. But just before you began, a quiet voice appeared in your head. What will people think? What if they laugh? What if I embarrass myself? And just like that, you stopped. Not because you couldn't do it, but because you imagined someone watching you fail. Psychologists have a word for this feeling: insecurity. That uncomfortable sense that something about you isn't good enough. Your voice, your skill, your appearance, your intelligence. It whispers the same message again and again. You are not ready yet. Back on the stage, the singer took a deep breath. He tried to begin the song, but his voice cracked on the first line, just a little, barely noticeable. But to him, it sounded like thunder. His face grew hot. His mind started racing. They heard that. They're laughing. They knew I wasn't good enough. His hands tightened around the microphone. For a moment, he considered continuing. But the imagined audience in his head had already made their decision. They were disappointed, maybe even amused. So he did what many people do when fear takes control. He stopped, mid-song. He lowered the microphone, muttered a quiet apology, and walked off the stage. But something strange happened a few moments later, something that would completely change the way he saw himself, and the way he saw the world. Someone in the theater control room reached for a switch and turned on the lights. Bright, blinding, revealing everything. And when the singer looked back toward the audience, his heart skipped a beat. Because the theater was completely empty. Not a single person was sitting in the seats. No critics, no laughter, no judgment. Just silence. And in that moment, a question quietly formed in his mind. If no one was watching, then who had he been afraid of all along? The strange thing is, that night on the stage was not the beginning of his fear. It had been there for years. Quiet. Invisible. Growing slowly in the background of his life. The singer's name was Daniel, and ever since he was a teenager, he loved music. Not the kind you perform for crowds. Just the kind you sing quietly in your room, late at night, when nobody can hear you, when mistakes are safe, when no one is watching. Daniel would sit by the window with his old guitar, the city lights glowing outside, and he would sing, not perfectly but honestly. Sometimes he recorded himself on his phone. Sometimes he wrote small pieces of songs, fragments of melodies, lines of lyrics. Dreams that only existed in private. Because every time he imagined sharing his voice with the world, something inside him tightened, a thought, sharp and immediate. They will laugh. So instead of performing, he prepared. Instead of sharing, he practiced. Instead of trying, he waited. I just need to get better first. I'll do it when I'm ready. I'll start when I'm confident. But confidence never came. Because confidence rarely arrives before action. It usually arrives after it. Months turned into years. Daniel watched other people perform online. Some were amazing, some were terrible. But they were doing something he wasn't. They were visible. They were trying. They were risking embarrassment. And strangely, people still supported them, still watched, still listened. But Daniel's mind didn't see that. It only saw the danger, the potential humiliation, the imagined laughter. Then one day, a small opportunity appeared. A local cafe was hosting an open mic night. Nothing big. Just a small stage, a microphone, and maybe 20 people drinking coffee. Daniel stared at the poster for a long time, his heart beating faster. Part of him felt excited, another part felt terrified. But after years of hiding, he made a decision. For the first time in his life, he would step onto a stage. He would sing in front of people. And that decision is what led him to the dark theater that night. The night his voice cracked. The night he walked off stage in shame. The night he believed everyone had seen him fail. But what Daniel didn't know yet was that his mind had been playing a powerful trick on him, a psychological illusion that traps millions of people every day. And the truth behind it was about to change everything. The lights in the theater were painfully bright. Daniel raised his hand to shield his eyes. A moment earlier, the room had been dark, safe, mysterious. Now everything was visible. Every row of seats, every aisle, every corner of the room. He slowly stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his heart still racing. Expecting to see the audience that had been living inside his imagination, but there was nothing there, just empty chairs, row after row, silent, still, untouched. Daniel blinked. Maybe they had left. Maybe they had walked out while he was singing, but something about that explanation didn't feel right. The seats looked too perfect, too undisturbed. No bags, no jackets, no coffee cups, no people. Just emptiness. A quiet voice came from the back of the theater. "First time on stage?" Daniel turned. Near the control booth stood an older man holding a clipboard, probably one of the stage technicians. Daniel forced a small smile. "I thought there were people out there." The man looked at the empty rows and chuckled softly. "Nope. He pointed toward the stage lights. When those things are on, you can't see anything past the first few feet. Daniel frowned. So, there was never anyone watching. The man shrugged. Kid, even when there are people out there, most of them aren't really watching. Daniel tilted his head. What do you mean? The man leaned casually against the wall. Look, when people sit in a crowd, something interesting happens. They stop thinking about the person on stage and start thinking about themselves. Some are wondering if they look awkward. Some are checking their phones. Some are thinking about work tomorrow. Some are worrying about their own problems. He gestured toward the empty theater. Everyone thinks they're under a spotlight. But the truth? Everyone is standing on their own stage. Daniel looked back at the rows of empty chairs, and suddenly something inside his mind shifted. A quiet realization. The fear he had felt, the shame, the imagined laughter, none of it had come from the world. It had come from his own thoughts. For years, Daniel had believed that people were constantly watching him, judging him, evaluating every mistake, every awkward moment, every imperfect note. But what if that wasn't true? What if the audience he feared existed mostly in his imagination? Psychologists actually have a name for this illusion. It's called the spotlight effect, a strange trick of the human brain. It makes us believe that other people are paying far more attention to us than they really are. We imagine that every small mistake is obvious, that every awkward moment is unforgettable, that every flaw is visible to everyone, but the reality is very different. Most people are far too busy thinking about themselves, their worries, their insecurities, their problems, their own imaginary spotlights. Daniel slowly sat down on the edge of the stage, the microphone still resting in his hand, and for the first time in years, he felt something unexpected, not embarrassment, not fear, but relief. If no one was truly watching him, then maybe he had been living inside the wrong story. Maybe the stage of life had never been as dangerous as he believed. Maybe the biggest barrier had never been the audience. Maybe it had always been his own insecurity. That quiet voice that whispers, "They're judging you. They're laughing. You look foolish." But now another thought was beginning to form. A simple idea, strangely liberating. If people weren't really paying attention to him, then maybe he was finally free to try. Free to fail. Free to sound terrible at first. Free to learn. And that night, sitting alone on the edge of that empty stage, Daniel discovered a rule that would slowly change his entire life. A rule so simple that most people overlook it, yet powerful enough to unlock courage in the most unexpected places. It was a rule that sounded almost rude at first. But the deeper truth behind it was pure freedom. The rule was this: nobody cares, not in a cruel way, not in a cold way, but in a very human way. Because everyone else is busy living on the stage of their own life, and once you truly understand that, something remarkable happens. Fear begins to lose its power. and the courage to begin finally appears. Daniel sat alone on the edge of the stage. The theater was still silent. The bright lights hummed softly above him. And in that strange, quiet moment, a new idea slowly settled into his mind. Nobody cares. At first, the sentence sounded harsh, almost depressing, but the longer he thought about it, the more freeing it felt. Because if nobody was truly watching him that closely, then maybe he had been afraid for no reason. Maybe the invisible prison he lived in had never been locked. Over the next few days, Daniel kept thinking about that night, about the empty theater, about the stage technician's words, and about the strange psychological illusion called the spotlight effect. The more he reflected on it, the more he began to notice something fascinating. Everywhere he looked, people were living inside their own spotlight. At the grocery store, a teenager adjusted his hair nervously in the reflection of a freezer door. At a cafe, a woman checked her phone repeatedly, worried someone had noticed her awkward conversation. At the gym, a man hesitated before lifting a light weight, glancing around as if someone might judge him. But no one was judging them. Everyone was busy worrying about themselves, their own appearance, their own mistakes, their own insecurities. And suddenly, Daniel realized something powerful. The spotlight wasn't real. Everyone was standing in the dark, imagining an audience that barely existed. That realization led him to create a simple rule for himself. He called it the nobody cares rule, not because people are cruel, but because people are human, and humans are too busy living their own lives to analyze yours. Daniel wrote the rule down in his notebook. And underneath it, he began to list a few principles, small reminders for the moments when fear returned. Principle number 1. People are thinking about themselves far more than they are thinking about you. The awkward moment you replay in your mind for hours. Other people probably forgot in seconds. Principle number 2. Looking foolish is the entry price of learning anything new. No one plays the guitar perfectly on day 1. No one speaks a new language without mistakes. No one walks onto a stage without shaking at first. Embarrassment is not a signal to stop. It is simply the beginning of growth. Principle number 3. Action weakens insecurity. Thinking about doing something rarely builds confidence. Doing the thing, even badly, does. Principle number 4. Repetition transforms fear into familiarity. The first attempt feels terrifying. The 10th feels uncomfortable. The 50th begins to feel normal. The principles looked simple on paper, but living them was much harder, because the mind doesn't abandon fear easily. A week later, Daniel returned to the same cafe, the same small open mic stage, the same microphone. His heart was pounding again, his palms were sweating, and that familiar voice returned. "You're going to sound terrible. People will notice. You'll embarrass yourself again." For a moment, he considered turning around, walking out, going home, just like before. Then he remembered the empty theater, the silent rows of chairs. The illusion he had lived inside for years, and he whispered something quietly to himself. Nobody cares. Not as an insult, but as permission. Permission to try, permission to be imperfect, permission to begin. So Daniel stepped onto the stage again. This time his voice still shook. His guitar chord slipped once. He missed a note during the second verse, and something surprising happened. Nothing. No laughter. No angry faces. No humiliation. A few people kept sipping their coffee. One person looked at their phone. Another nodded gently to the rhythm of the song. And when he finished, a few people clapped. Not wildly, not dramatically, but kindly, normally, like people do. Daniel stepped off the stage, and for the first time, he didn't feel ashamed. He felt something small, but powerful. Progress. Over the following weeks, he kept returning. Each time a little less afraid, each time a little more comfortable, not because the spotlight disappeared, but because he had stopped believing the illusion. He had discovered something many people never realize. Confidence is not built in private. It is built in public, while looking a little foolish along the way. And the moment you stop fearing that foolishness, you unlock a kind of freedom most people never experience. The freedom to begin. Weeks turned into months. Daniel kept returning to the small cafe stage every Thursday night. Same microphone, same warm yellow lights, same smell of coffee drifting through the room. At first, the fear was still there, just quieter, like a distant echo instead of a thunderstorm. His hands still trembled sometimes, his voice still cracked occasionally. And every now and then, he still felt that old wave of insecurity rising inside his chest. But something important had changed. Daniel no longer treated those feelings as a stop sign. He treated them as part of the process. The first few performances were rough, a forgotten lyric, a missed chord, an awkward pause between verses, moments that once would have haunted him for weeks. But now, he remembered the rule. Nobody cares, not in the cruel sense, but in the freeing sense. People were not sitting in the audience analyzing his every mistake. Most were just enjoying their coffee, or their conversation, or the quiet music filling the room. And strangely, the less he tried to look perfect, the more relaxed he became. One night, something small but meaningful happened. Daniel started a new song, a song he had written himself. Halfway through the first verse, he forgot a line. For a split second, his mind froze. Months earlier, this moment would have destroyed him. He would have stopped the song. Apologized. Walked off the stage, but this time he laughed. Just a quick, honest laugh. Then he said into the microphone, "Give me a second. I wrote this yesterday." A few people in the audience chuckled. Not in mockery, in understanding. Daniel took a breath, found the lyric again, and continued singing. The moment passed, like a ripple disappearing in water. That was the moment Daniel realized something powerful. Confidence had not suddenly appeared. He had simply stopped running away from imperfection. As the months passed, other changes began to happen. Daniel stood a little straighter on stage. His voice sounded stronger, his guitar playing smoother. Not perfect, but real, authentic, alive. And something else changed, too. The audience began to grow, not because he was flawless, but because he was comfortable being human. People stayed longer. Some returned the next week. A few even asked him about his songs, and every time he walked onto that stage, Daniel remembered the night in the empty theater, the night he discovered the illusion that had controlled him for years. The imaginary spotlight, the invisible audience of critics, the fear that had never truly existed. One evening, as he finished his final song, the cafe erupted into warm applause. Nothing huge, nothing dramatic, but genuine. Daniel smiled as he stepped off the stage, not because of the applause, but because of what it represented. He was no longer the person who waited to feel confident before acting. He had become someone different. Someone who understood a simple truth about growth. You don't wait until you feel ready. You act while feeling uncertain. You try while feeling awkward. You begin while feeling afraid. And somewhere along that imperfect journey, confidence quietly grows behind you, like footprints forming in the sand, only visible after you have already walked forward. There is a quiet moment that changes people, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a small shift inside the mind, the moment you realize something important about the world and about yourself. For Daniel, that moment happened on a dark stage, in an empty theater, under a spotlight that wasn't real. For years, he believed people were watching him, judging him, waiting for him to fail, but the audience he feared had mostly existed inside his imagination. And once he understood that, something powerful happened. Fear lost its authority. The truth is, most people are not thinking about you. They are thinking about themselves, their problems, their dreams, their worries, their own insecurities. Everyone believes they are standing under a spotlight, but in reality, everyone is standing on their own stage, trying to figure life out, just like you. This is why so many dreams stay trapped inside people. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, but because they believe the world is watching too closely. So they wait. They wait until they feel confident. They wait until they feel ready. They wait until they feel perfect. And sometimes they wait forever. But confidence rarely appears before action. Confidence grows after you begin, after the awkward attempts, after the mistakes, after the moments where you look a little foolish. Because every skill starts the same way, messy, uncertain, imperfect. The first time you speak a new language, your words stumble. The first time you go to the gym, you feel out of place. The first time you share your ideas, your voice shakes. But those uncomfortable moments are not signs that you should stop. They are signs that you are learning, that you are growing, that you are finally stepping onto the stage of your own life, and the most liberating truth of all. Most people are too busy living their own story to judge yours. So the real question isn't, what if people laugh? The real question is, what might your life look like if you stopped worrying about the imaginary audience? Maybe you would start that project. Maybe you would learn that skill. Maybe you would share your voice with the world. Maybe you would finally begin, because the greatest freedom in life often begins with a simple realization. The spotlight you fear is mostly an illusion. And once you see that illusion clearly, you can step forward anyway. Imperfect, uncertain, human, but moving. And sometimes, that single step is all it takes to change the direction of your entire life. So remember this. Stop waiting to feel confident. Start anyway. Stop waiting to feel confident. Start anyway.